Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, your daily source of Black news, Black views, and Black opinions. It is Friday. We made it. Today is April 29th, and I'm Mimi Brown.
My name is Romeo.
I'm Demi Lobo, and on today's report, 30 years ago today, 4 Los Angeles police officers were acquitted of assault with a deadly weapon in the beating of an unarmed black man named Rodney King. Today, we pay homage to his life and revisit a moment that changed the world forever. Meanwhile, Kenosha, Wisconsin police are asking the FBI to look into an incident where an off-duty cop held a 12-year-old girl down with his knee during a lunchroom fight. The consequences the child's father wants the officer to face. Then, the family of a New Jersey man who suffers from mental illness is suing a correction facility after he was left paralyzed from brutal beatings that happened in jail. We have the story.
Plus, find out what team says he would sign Colin Kaepernick without any question, and comedian Marlon Wayans stops by to give us a take on this week's hottest topics with a little side eye. Yes, it is Friday. We have all of that and so much more. This is our voice and our truth, so let's get it.
"30 years ago today, 4 Los Angeles officers were acquitted of the savage beating of Rodney King. The beating, caught on camera by a bystander, would later broadcast into the homes across the nation, igniting a national conversation about police and their use of force that still continues to this day. Now, it all began with a traffic violation, as so many of these things usually do. On Sunday, March 3rd, 1991, King says he was traveling 45 miles in a 35-mile-per-hour zone, but officers say he was going about 100 miles per hour. After a high-speed chase through Los Angeles, King was ordered out of the car. LAPD officers kicked him repeatedly and beat him with batons for about 15 minutes. The video shows more than a dozen cops standing by and watching and commenting on the beating. Now, King's injuries resulted in skull fractures, broken bones and teeth, and permanent brain damage. Ultimately, the 4 officers were charged with excessive force, but 1 year later, on April 29th, 1992, a jury consisting of 12 residents from a distant white suburb found the officers not guilty. The acquittals were announced at 3 p.m. and less than 3 hours later, the unrest began. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's taking it. It's a lot.
It's a lot. You know, there are moments in time where you can really pinpoint when the world changed. And I think, you know, you can go back to Emmett Till, you can go back to Rodney King, and we're going to talk about George Floyd later, but you can also, you know, pinpoint that with George Floyd. And I think, you know, when this video came out, there were 2 groups of people. There were the black people that said, we've been telling you this for 100 years. And then there were the white people that were shocked and appalled by what they were seeing. And so, you know, as time progressed and they continue to see this, I think black people were really, it was a moment in time where black people really got to say, you know, this is what we've been dealing with. This is what has been going on. And you have to think about, in 1991, someone having a handheld camera, you know, like we have our cell phones now, right? But think about, that was supposed to happen. That was that moment in history that was supposed to happen to change it forever.
You know, a couple of things. It's so much that we're going to talk about Rodney King today. So I know we don't have to get every point in and every story. But I really want to touch on something you just said about having a camcorder, because when George Floyd, and I think that it's safe to say that we're going to talk a lot about George Floyd today because they are so similar. You know, having a camcorder and a person feeling brave enough to take a video and watch someone get treated so badly by police and be brave enough to share that video, those people are the people that really should be commended. Because if it were not for those people having a camcorder, Mimi, we're talking about not an iPhone and an Android and a note, you know, we're talking about a camcorder. I just want to commend those people today that were brave enough to take those videos and stand up.
I agree with that, and we're going to talk about this for a few other stories. So I just want to put this in people's mind. Fighters box for 3 rounds. Imagine being hit for just 3 minutes, right? How about a football player with just the impact, just what that hit does? This man was hit by several police officers for 15 minutes. For he was speeding. That's all this was, right? Yes, it was a problem, but at that point, you had him apprehended. You had the situation under control, but for 15 minutes. And I will carry on as we carry on with this
Yes,
story.
we will have much more on Rodney King. And staying in line here, the same month that Rodney King was beaten, a Korean store owner in South LA shot and killed a 15-year-old black girl accused of trying to steal a carton of orange juice. The store owner grabbed Harlins and a scuffle. It started to ensue. So Harlins broke free and moved toward the store's exit. As she prepared to leave, the store owner shot her in the back of the head. Harlins was pronounced dead at the scene. It was later discovered Harlins was clutching money to pay for the juice when she was killed. Now, a jury found the store owner guilty of voluntary manslaughter with a maximum sentence of 16 years in prison. A judge, however, gave the owner probation, 400 hours of community service, and a $500 fine. That enraged the African-American community in the city that was already having a rocky relationship with Korean immigrants. Now, Harlan's death and the slap on the wrist that the owner received as punishment, it intensified the African-American community's frustration with the criminal justice system in Los Angeles. And here we are again, 30 years later, still infuriated. May not be with the same group of people, may not be with the same police department. I'm sure we still have ways that we feel about LAPD. But 30 years later, we're still going through the exact same thing. And I'm sure that the people that were going through this 30 years ago were like, wow, I think hopefully next year we won't have to deal with this. But 2022, still infuriated and still furious.
Yeah, no, here we are, Demi, to your point. And, you know, I think at that time we have to really remember what the climate was like when this happened. You know, the Rodney King video had came out, and then 2 weeks later, this young lady was shot in the back of the head for a $1.79 bottle of orange juice. I mean, to really bring it home, $1.79, you know what I mean? Like, what was that going to do to your store, even if she had walked out with it? You know, I think the tensions were so high, and I hate to say this, but at the time, I believe that they were probably afraid of us. And so you can't come into our community and set up shop and be afraid of us all at the same time.
I agree, and sometimes that's part of the frustration. You know, people of color and black communities want to set up shop within their community, but sometimes you have outsiders that can come and do it easier than they can. Excuse me, and they'll get the opportunity, and they'll get help from the city and the state to do so. But the thing was, they pretty much got a slap on the hand for both of these crimes, right? So as black Americans in this country screaming from the top of the mountain, this has been going on, that's why we reached a boiling point. And that's what led to so many things. And now I think about it, here's a man that was beaten for 15 minutes for speeding, going close to 100 miles an hour. Now you have someone that may get pulled over for an expired license plate, and their life could be taken away. This is still happening, right?
I mean,
we're talking 30 years later.
Traffic stops, again, I tell this to you guys all the time, that they make me so nervous about getting pulled over by the police. And Romeo, you talked about the slap on the wrist. That is the one thing. This was so low, $500, a few hours of, exactly, for a life. It's really shameful.
And you make this point all the time. What is the value of a black life? We talk about this all the time, Demi, and you say that all the time. So in this case, it was $500.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. Well, the beating of Rodney King and the murder of Latasha Harlins all came to an explosive climax for the black community in Los Angeles. The acquittal of the officers in the Rodney King beating set off one of the largest rebellions in American history.
This 15-year-old child who got her brains shot and blown out over a dispute over a bottle of orange juice was the precursor to the civil unrest in '92. After the jurors found the LAPD cops not guilty for beating Rodney King.
The second largest city in America burned for 5 days. It was the epicenter of anger that had been seething in black Los Angeles for decades. It kicked off at the intersection of Florence and Normandy in South LA. When 911 calls about the violence started coming in, police were not deployed. It would later be reported that the city was not prepared for a major social unrest on this scale. The mayor at the time called for a state of emergency, and 2,000 National Guard troops were deployed to the city. And the third day of the riots, Rodney King himself attempted to publicly appeal to the residents to stop.
I just want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the
The 5 days of unrest left 50 people dead, 2,000 injured, nearly 6,000 people arrested, and $1 billion in damage. And, you know, we talk about what happened in that city at that time. Some people would sit back and say, look, they're burning up their own backyard. They're burning up their own neighborhoods. But there was anger. And at the end of the day, we feel like that's really not ours. I mean, at that point, we talk about generational wealth. When we talk about having something that we can call our own, we felt like we were losing that, and we just had no respect. We were just not getting the same respect as other people in this country after these two incidents happened.
Yeah, you know, Romeo, when we were talking about George Floyd, because I remember our live footage those few weeks with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin's murder trial, we kept going back to Rodney King because, of course, we live in Los Angeles, so that's our backyard. This is our backyard, the story that we're talking about now. And so I remember seeing a Walmart and a Walgreens being burned up across the street from me when George Floyd's case was after George Floyd's death and Derek Chauvin's murder trial. And so everyone was just like, oh, it's Target. We were watching on television. Target was getting, people were going inside. And none of us, honestly, the black community, we did not care. Like Romeo, like you're saying, we did not care. Target will rebuild. All these places, they will rebuild. They will be okay. Our black lives are way more important. And the world, these corporations, these million-dollar companies and CEOs who they're not directly related to this. You see it on television, but this doesn't happen to them. So to them, we needed to make it known that our lives matter.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to remember when the riots happened, they were not prepared for the riots at all. In fact, they didn't have the tactical gear, they didn't have any of the communication devices that they had. And the police chief or the mayor at the time was at a fundraiser in Brentwood. Like, they had no idea on how to even respond to something like this because they couldn't see it coming. But we as a community, we felt it because we, you know, from Rodney King and to Latasha, we felt it and we knew there was an uprising that was boiling. It was breeding
well, they're
in the
not
ground.
supposed to see it coming.
But that's the point, is that they thought that they can continue to mistreat us and that we weren't going to, you know, be upset. We weren't going to do anything. You know, that was just a frustration that was coming out.
And sometimes you get to a point, I think we're all kind of saying the same thing here, is that you get to a point where what else can you do? I even feel like that now in 2022. Like, everyone, so many deaths happen day after day after day. What is it that we really can do to get the attention that our black lives matter more than money after you kill us?
Well, the relationship between the black community and law enforcement in Los Angeles remains frigid. According to the Los Angeles Times, an analysis, black people make up less than 10% of the population in LA County, but 24% of law enforcement killings. The economic disparities that concerned black people in 1992 still persist today. Remnants of the uprising still stand in the form of wrecked buildings that were never repaired. If there were some good news, though, out of the riots, it led to the end of LAPD's lifetime tenure of police chief, the creation of a civil oversights board, and changes to recruitment and chaining. But when we look at what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, it's like seeing LA in 1992 all over again. Floyd's death sparked a rebellion and spearheaded a social justice movement across the nation. You know, I think it's very important to remember that was 30 years ago, but you almost can't tell with everything that's happened. You know, I think the small thing that we can say that's different is that individually officers are being held accountable more than they were before, but I think that they need to go in and they need to overhaul the entire department. I think because there's a breeding ground that has been led to be able to do what they want to do. So we always talk about the bad apples, but think about it. If I'm the hiring manager and you're coming in for a job interview, and if I'm racist or, you know, I don't like black people, if you say something, if you give me one of my talking points, then I'm going to hire you. So there's a breeding ground in the departments that I think that they need to look at. And I think we're seeing that with the Minneapolis Police Department, the Minnesota, what they did with the report. They're going and they're looking at the entire department. And I think once we can start looking at entire departments and breeding and leading and getting out of the people, the bad apples, if it's the whole department, then it's the whole department. But we need to definitely stop looking at the individual and look at the department.
Well, because maybe when you have one bad apple, monkey see, monkey do. If someone sees that, because then you see, well, if this person is doing this and they're getting away with it, then I can get away with it as well.
That's what I'm saying. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so the survivor of a Mother Emanuel AME Church massacre, they're pushing for South Carolina lawmakers to pass a hate crimes bill. So in a 2-minute video played in the State House's Senate chamber, Polly Shepard reminded GOP lawmakers against the bill that a former colleague of theirs was killed by hate. Senator and Emanuel AME pastor Clementa Pinckney was gunned down by white supremacist Dylan Roof in 2015. Now, opponents of the bill, they say it would curb free speech. South Carolina's House passed the bill last year, but debate on the bill was delayed in the Senate.
Kenosha, Wisconsin police are asking the FBI to look into an incident in which an off-duty cop holds a 12-year-old girl down while his knee is on her neck during the lunchroom fight. Interim Chief Eric Larson says he asked for the FBI's help because of the high-profile nature of the case. Surveillance video of the March 4th fight shows the Kenosha officer intervening in the fight. He then manhandles one of the girls. The officer has been resigned from the school job and is on administrative leave for the police department. The child's father says he wants the officer to face criminal charges.
And a Michigan man is being charged with 6 counts of interfering with federally protected activities after he allegedly left nooses and racist notes around the city. Justice Department officials say Kenneth Pylon left the messages and nooses in an effort to stop people from supporting Black Lives Matter protests. Investigators say he went to several businesses in the area, leaving handwritten messages at random stores around the city. He's also accused of harassing a mixed-race couple.
And the murder trial of a teen killed by a stray bullet fell apart this week after the detective found the murder weapon already in evidence. This happened in Cincinnati. Now, the case was dropped this week as jury selection was underway. For 2 years, the prosecution and attorneys for the suspect, Delrico Peoples, were going to trial without the weapon that killed Brandon Phoenix. But Monday, the lead detective in the case suddenly found the gun as he was going through the evidence. Now, it turns out police had the gun since 2019, but they never tested it to see if it matched the shell casings that were found at the shooting scene. Another man who lived near Peoples was arrested with a gun in October of 2019 for months after the shooting. Now, Peoples had already been charged and was in jail at that point.
The ACLU is suing the state of Mississippi, accusing the state Supreme Court of diluting the black vote. Voting rights activists say the majority white state Supreme Court is violating the Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution in ways that suppress black voters' rights. 8 of the 9 current justices on Mississippi Supreme Court are white, even though the state is 38% African American. The civil rights groups want the maps to fairly represent the state's population.
And Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is signing a bill that rejects the real history of America. Kemp signed into law the Protect Students First Act. That law outlines the so-called divisive concepts that proponents say teach the United States is fundamentally racist. Opponents of the law say parents in the state want their children to be taught accurate curriculum about the nation. Kemp also signed the Parents' Bill of Rights. Proponents say that law provides greater transparency to parents, providing what their students are being taught in school.
And in Texas, a group of residents are suing their county for removing books from public libraries because officials don't agree with them. So residents of Llano County, they say the county is violating the First Amendment by removing award-winning books from their library shelves. The books include the Pulitzer Prize-winning book on race, Caste, by a Howard University alumni Isabel Wilkerson. Now, Maurice Sendek's children's book In the Night Kitchen has also been banned. Texas is the epicenter of the GOP book banning movement.
The family of a New Jersey man who suffers from mental illness is suing a correction facility after he was left paralyzed from a brutal beating in jail. This is the surveillance video right here of the attack on 22-year-old Jashawn Boyd. Boyd, who suffers from schizophrenia, was placed in a gang unit in September instead of a mental ward. He was jailed because he missed a court hearing from incidents at his home. Surveillance video posted on social media show inmates kicking and stumping his head, then leaving him on the ground unconscious. While 7 men were ambushing Boyd, the officer, the officer charged of the unit, he was in charge of that unit. He ran instead of helping out. Now, Boyd is suing Essex County jail guards, officials, and health workers. He alleges they subjected him to unsafe conditions. The officials failed to stop the attack, and he received inadequate medical care. Boyd, who was paralyzed from the waist down, is also suffering severe brain injuries.
An African-American man in Texas is filing a federal lawsuit against his employer. He says he was fired for complaining about racist behavior of his coworkers. Christopher Vickers says his supervisor at Bison Specialty Services in Beaumont made jokes about black people and bragged about how being part of a white supremacist gang. His lawyers say when he complained, though, to his bosses, they ignored those complaints and say that they have violated his civil rights now by making him stay in a hostile, discriminatory work environment. A lawsuit also alleges the company only allowed white workers to park in the front of the building and carry guns.